Welcome to Life Stories. What if everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie? What if the person you trusted most betrayed you, and not just once, but over and over again? Imagine walking into a room, thinking you were finally in control, only to find that the rug has been pulled out from under you. This is the story of Sarah Whitaker, a woman who had spent her life in the shadows, working hard to prove her worth. But when her father's will is read, everything changes. With one revelation, she finds herself thrust into a power struggle that could tear her family apart. The question isn't whether she can survive, it's whether she can keep her humanity in a world that values power above all else. Stay with us as we uncover the secrets that bind and break families, and watch as Sarah makes a decision that will change everything. Let's begin. The wind howled fiercely, rattling the tall windows of the mansion. The storm outside seemed trivial compared to the tempest that swirled inside the dining room. Sarah Whitaker sat stiffly at the grand oak table, her hands pressed against the cool, polished surface. The estate in the Adirondacks was everything her father had worked for, a symbol of his power. But the power in the room was shifting, and Sarah could feel it. Her father, Thomas Whitaker, leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. With one swift motion, he slid a thick, heavy envelope across the table toward her younger brother, Jake. The envelope was unremarkable, yet the contents would change everything. Thomas's voice broke through the silence, sharp as ever. "Congratulations, Jake," he said, his words dripping with approval. "You've earned it." Jake's lips twitched into a tight smile, his eyes casting a fleeting glance at Sarah. He was everything their father wanted. The ambitious son, the loyal heir, the one who had learned how to play the game, how to seize control with a ruthless smile and a handshake that promised nothing but domination. The deed to the estate, the company, the offshore accounts, they were all his. Sarah felt the weight of it pressed down on her chest, her fingers trembling. She was 34, yet in this moment she felt no older than 10. The years spent working overseas, helping people, had earned her nothing. Her palms were slick with sweat as she struggled to maintain composure. Jake's gaze dropped to the table. His silence felt like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just the wealth, not just the power her father handed him on a silver platter. It was the fact that in this moment, she was invisible. Her stepmother, Catherine, sat beside Thomas, her eyes fixed downward, avoiding the scene. She fiddled nervously with her diamond necklace, her lips tight in a controlled expression of concern. But Sarah could see the truth behind her polished demeanor. Her stepmother was no ally, not for Sarah. Thomas turned to Sarah, his eyes glinting with disdain. "And you, Sarah," he sneered, the words slicing through the air. "You've always been a dreamer, too weak, too compassionate to survive in this world." Sarah's stomach lurched. His words were nothing new. She had heard them all her life. But this time, they struck deeper than ever before. It wasn't just about the business. It was about her worth. Her entire life had been dismissed in a single breath. But then, there was something she hadn't expected. Mr. Carter, the family lawyer, cleared his throat nervously. He had been silent up until now, an unwilling spectator in a game that was about to change. "Actually," he said, his voice steady despite the tension, "there's something you should all know before we proceed." Thomas scowled, his expression darkening. "What now?" Mr. Carter opened the leather folder in front of him, pulling out a yellowed document. He didn't hesitate. "This is a sealed amendment to the will, one that was made 6 years ago, at the request of your late wife, Margaret." Sarah's heart skipped. Margaret, her mother, the only person who had ever truly believed in her, the woman who had seen the strength in Sarah that no one else had ever recognized. Thomas looked furious, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. "What amendment?" Thomas barked, his voice rising. Mr. Carter didn't flinch. "It's to remain sealed unless you ever attempted to disinherit Sarah." The words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating the room. Sarah sat frozen, her mind racing. What was this? What did her mother know that they didn't? Mr. Carter turned to her, offering the document. "Would you like to read it, or shall I?" Sarah's throat was dry. She shook her head. The words she wanted to speak caught somewhere deep inside her. But she knew she had to face this. "Read it," Sarah said softly. Mr. Carter cleared his throat again and unfolded the page, the sound of paper tearing through the silence. He read aloud, his voice steady but carrying the gravity of the moment. In the event that my daughter, Sarah Whitaker, is deemed unworthy by her father, I hereby grant her full authority over my share of Whitaker Enterprises. All voting rights are to be transferred to her name, overriding any previous agreements regarding the company or the estate. The room seemed to stop. The air thickened with disbelief. For a moment, Sarah could only hear the rain outside, its soft patter against the windows, a contrast to the storm that raged inside her. "What does that mean?" Thomas shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "It means," Mr. Carter replied, turning to Sarah, "that Sarah is now the majority shareholder. Nothing you sign today can override that." The world seemed to shift under Sarah's feet. She had never asked for this, never wanted to tear her family apart. But now, the power was hers. For the first time, she could take control of her destiny, and that terrified her. Her father rose abruptly, the chair screeching loudly as he shoved it back. He looked like a man who had just been stripped of everything he thought he controlled. "This is absurd," Thomas spat. "She doesn't even understand the business." Sarah stood slowly, her voice unwavering. "Maybe not your version of it," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "But I know how to lead, I know how to protect, and I know how to build without tearing people down." Her father's eyes widened, and for the first time, Sarah saw something in them that wasn't rage. It was fear. Real, palpable fear. And in that moment, Sarah realized that this was no longer about business. It was about family. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen from her. The respect, the dignity, the truth. Do you believe that family loyalty can be rebuilt, or is it forever fractured? What would you do if the power to change everything was suddenly in your hands? But Sarah wasn't done. She had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. As she walked out of the room, her mind raced with the knowledge that the moment she had just stepped into would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone involved. The door closed behind her, but she could feel it, the storm that had been unleashed. Ryan wasn't finished. The true fight had just begun. The days after Sarah had taken control of Whitaker Enterprises felt surreal. It was a world she had never truly belonged to, and now, suddenly, she was its ruler. But power was a heavy cloak to wear, and she felt the weight of it with every decision, every choice she made. The company was in turmoil, its foundation cracked by years of greed and mismanagement. Yet there was no time to heal, no time to reflect. Sarah had to act. The first week passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and frantic paperwork. She had the majority shares now, but she also had something far more dangerous: the attention of those who wanted to take it away from her. It wasn't just Jake she had to worry about anymore. No, the board, the employees, even the media, they all watched her with skepticism. They wanted her to fail. She could feel their eyes on her every time she walked into a room, waiting for her to slip up. Jake hadn't spoken to her since that night. His silence was a pressure that hung heavy in the air. Sarah had hoped, foolishly, that he'd accept his defeat with grace, that he'd see her as the leader she was destined to be. But that was not to be. His coldness was like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. And it was in that silence that Sarah began to question herself. She hadn't asked for this fight. She hadn't wanted to tear the family apart. But the power her mother had entrusted her with, it was hers now, whether she wanted it or not. And every time she sat in that boardroom, every time she stared at the mountain of problems before her, the weight of her mother's will pressed on her chest like a vice. What was she supposed to do with it? How was she supposed to lead when all she had ever wanted was peace? One afternoon, after another tense meeting with the board, Sarah sat alone in her office. Her fingers drummed anxiously on the desk as she stared at the stack of reports in front of her. Outside the window, the world continued on. A world of people with lives far more normal than hers had become. She could feel the walls closing in. Her eyes flicked over to the leather-bound folder that had changed everything, the sealed amendment to the will. Her mother had believed in her. But did she, Sarah? Believe in herself? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She wiped the moisture from her palms and straightened her back. "Come in," she called. Rosa, the janitor who had quietly stood by her in those first weeks, stepped in with a hesitant smile. She had become one of the few people Sarah trusted in the office. Rosa had been there when Sarah had felt like an outsider, when she was about to break, and Rosa had been the one to remind her that she wasn't alone. But today, Rosa's smile was uncertain, as if she had something heavy on her heart. "Miss Whitaker," she said, her voice softer than usual, "I need to talk to you." Sarah gestured for her to sit. "What's on your mind, Rosa?" The older woman hesitated, shifting in her seat. "It's about Jake," she began, her voice quiet. I know things about him, things he's been doing behind your back, things that could ruin everything you've worked for." Sarah's heart skipped. "What things?" Her voice was steady, but inside, panic began to rise. Rosa pulled a manila folder from her bag and placed it carefully on the desk. She opened it slowly, as if revealing a deep secret. "I've been working here for over 28 years. I've seen how things work in this company. I've seen what people hide, and I've seen Jake. He's been skimming from the company, funneling money through fake contracts, lying about deals to investors, and covering up any sign of misconduct. He's been building his own empire, using Whitaker Enterprises as his personal piggy bank." Sarah stared at the papers in disbelief. She felt her stomach drop, the world spinning. The evidence was damning. Proof of Jake's corruption, the lies he'd told, the deals he'd made under the table. But what did this mean? How could she prove it? She had no way to track these secret deals, no way to bring them to light. Jake had been careful, meticulous. He had always been the golden child, the one her father had chosen. And now, Sarah was the one standing alone with the truth. This is everything," Sarah whispered, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the documents. "If I expose him, if I use this..." She couldn't finish her thought. What would happen? Could she really destroy her brother, her family? Was it worth it? Rosa's voice was steady, unshaken by Sarah's doubt. "You have to make a choice, Miss Whitaker. This company, your future, your family, it's all at a breaking point. Jake is dangerous. If you don't do something, you won't just lose the company. You'll lose everything your mother believed in. Your legacy, your future. It will all crumble. He's already planning his next move, you know." Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts spiraling. For the first time since she'd taken control, she wasn't sure what to do. Her mother had left her the power. She had left her the key to the future. But it had come with a price. If she used this power, would she be the one to tear everything apart? Could she destroy her brother to protect everything else? "I can't lose what I've worked for," Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to Rosa. "But I can't destroy my family either." Rosa didn't respond immediately. She simply watched Sarah, waiting for her to make the decision that would change everything. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Sarah stood, her mind made up. She could feel the truth inside her like a fire, burning hotter with every passing second. "I have to confront him. I can't let him get away with this. But I won't be like him. I won't destroy him. There has to be another way." Rosa nodded, standing up slowly. "Then, you're ready." The two women locked eyes, and Sarah knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than her. The stakes had been raised. She was no longer fighting just for control. She was fighting for everything her mother had believed in, for everything that had been stolen from her, and for the future that she could still build. What would you do if you were Sarah? Would you choose to protect your family, or would you expose the truth at any cost? The moment Sarah stepped into that boardroom again, she knew the battle was far from over. Jake had no idea what was coming, but the truth always finds a way to rise to the surface. Would it destroy her, or would it be her greatest weapon? Only time would tell. The morning after Sarah had made her decision, the boardroom felt different. It was quieter, almost too still, as if the weight of what was coming hung heavy in the air. She could feel the eyes of the shareholders on her, waiting for her to make a move. She could feel Jake's gaze as well, a simmering anger masked by a false calm. It had only been a few days since she had confronted him with the truth of his corruption, and yet it felt like a lifetime. But Sarah knew something had shifted, not just in the company, but inside herself. The woman who had walked into that room was no longer the timid daughter, afraid of her father's scorn, afraid of her brother's power. She was someone else now, someone who had found her voice and her purpose, and she was determined to make sure the truth, no matter how painful, would be heard. The board members were seated in their usual places, their expressions a mixture of doubt, curiosity, and nervous anticipation. Sarah stood at the head of the table, the morning sunlight casting long shadows across the room. She could see Rosa standing just outside the door, watching with a knowing look in her eyes. Sarah nodded once, a signal for her to come in. Rosa stepped forward, holding a small folder tightly in her hands. Her movements were steady, almost ceremonious, as she walked to the table and placed the folder in front of Sarah. The room fell silent as Sarah took a deep breath, her fingers brushing over the folder. "Before we continue," Sarah said, her voice clear and calm, "I need to address something that has been hanging over this company for too long." She looked at Jake, whose face was rigid, his jaw clenched in a way that spoke volumes. "I know about the money," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "I know about the shell companies, the fake contracts, the bribes, and I know that you've been using this company, our family's legacy, as your personal playground." Jake's face went pale, and for the first time, Sarah saw him falter. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if trying to steady himself. But Sarah could see it now, the cracks in his carefully constructed armor. "Let me make one thing clear," Sarah continued, her voice rising with a quiet strength. "I didn't come here to destroy you. I didn't come here to tear apart this family. I came here to save it, to restore the values my mother believed in, the values that you've forsaken." The room was silent, every eye trained on Sarah. She opened the folder Rosa had brought and pulled out the damning evidence, emails, bank transfers, financial records. She laid them out in front of the board, one by one, allowing the weight of the truth to settle in the air. "These are not just accusations," Sarah said softly. "These are facts. Facts that will destroy everything you've built, Jake, if the truth comes out." Jake's face was a study in rage and fear. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He glanced at his father, but Thomas's eyes were fixed on the documents in front of him, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, Sarah wondered if her father's silence meant something more, whether the truth had finally broken through to him. But she couldn't wait for him to make a decision. The time for waiting had long passed. She turned back to the board members, her eyes steady. "I won't press charges. I won't destroy my brother. But the truth needs to be known, and it starts here with all of you." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "If we are going to rebuild this company, we need to be honest with ourselves. We need to build a foundation that stands for something more than greed and lies. And that starts with transparency." The tension in the room was palpable. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. But then Mr. Halpern, a retired board member who had been with the company for decades, cleared his throat. His voice was low, but steady. "I doubted you," he said, looking at Sarah. "I thought you were just another idealist who would crumble under the pressure. But today you reminded me why we built this company in the first place." He turned to the others. "We've all been complicit in letting this go on for too long. It's time for a change." One by one, the other board members nodded. They had seen the truth, and they knew that Sarah was right. The company, for all its success, had lost its soul, and now it was time to reclaim it. As the meeting continued, Sarah's mind wandered for a brief moment to the family she had lost. Her mother, who had believed in her when no one else did. Her father, whose love had always been conditional, based on success rather than integrity. And Jake, her brother, who had been her closest ally as a child, but had become a stranger driven by ambition and greed. But Sarah didn't feel anger, not anymore. She didn't feel the need for revenge. She only felt an overwhelming sadness for what could have been, for the family that had been torn apart by their own desires. She was determined, now more than ever, to build something better. But she also knew that it would take time, and that rebuilding trust was no easy task. After the meeting, Sarah returned to her office, her heart heavy but resolute. She sat down at her desk, staring at the company's logo, a symbol of a family legacy that was no longer just about wealth, but about what they could build together. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Jake. "I hope you're happy now, Sarah. You've won. But don't think this is over. I won't go down without a fight." Sarah read the message, her heart sinking. But she didn't respond. She didn't need to. The war was far from over, but she was no longer the person she had been when she first walked into that boardroom. She had changed. She had grown. And now she was ready to lead, not with power, but with compassion. Not with anger, but with integrity. And as the sun began to set over the Adirondacks, Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult. But it was hers to walk. How would you have handled the truth if you were Sarah? Would you have confronted your family, or let the secrets stay buried? The fight was far from over, but Sarah was no longer afraid. The future was hers to build, and she was determined to do it with the strength of the truth on her side. What would come next for her, for the company, and for her family was uncertain. But one thing was clear. Sarah Whitaker had just begun to lead. If you love this story, comment 100 below and share your thoughts with us. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to share this video with your friends. And thank you for supporting the Life Stories channel.